Hey there, it's Paul Omahony here, and today I want to answer a question that a lot of people have. Do you constantly feel stressed? Do you constantly feel really busy and that just things are out of your control? In this video, I'm going to address this. So if you find that what I'm talking about in this particular video resonates with you and you'd love to learn more, feel free to go to rethinktimemanagement.com where I get into this in a lot more detail. So recently I finished writing the book Rethink Time Management, where if you actually look at the cover, there's a little bit of a humor in there in that it somewhat looks like a Bible or some type of kind of religious teaching. And in fact, the tagline I have is a God's Guide to Heaven on Earth, which obviously jumps out and gets people attention either positively or negatively. But I have God, initial G-O-D. And what do I mean by God's Guide to Heaven on Earth, and what could that possibly mean? Well, ultimately, when I think about time and you think about stress and you think about people's lives, ultimately we all want to live long, productive, happy lives, right? And as I was reading and studying the topic of managing time over the past decade or so, one of the things that I found around the different books that I was reading there was that they were incredibly boring and dull, right? Because time management can be a very dull subject to talk about. Get yourself some lists and write things down and all this kind of thing. But, there were quite a few books that were very good as well, obviously, in terms of the content that they were providing. But I just felt after reading them that there was nothing tangible there that was easy to remember without constantly going back to that book. So what I did was, I was out for exercising one day and the idea came to me, well, why don't I connect what I teach to something that we can all relate to, or at least have heard stories about from a young age, like the Bible, for example, okay, and then the story of life and death and so on. And the more I thought about it, the more it actually resonated really well with time. And we'll get to God's Guide to Heaven and Earth in a moment and what that specifically is. But what I find for most people in life is that they live in this state of limbo. Okay, this kind of middle ground. And I use the acronym LIMBO for lacking important mission-based order. Let me repeat that, lacking important mission-based order. Where basically they're living day to day without having clarity on their goals or their mission or their vision or why are they here. And that leads to stress and it leads to dis-ease, okay? Because you don't know what you're trying to achieve. So then when you're choosing what you do minute to minute, hour to hour, it can be very difficult to do that, okay? And what I want to talk about in the book is how do you make sure you don't slip from limbo to hell, for example, which I call having an emptily lived life, right? Having an emptily lived life where you just don't feel fulfilled. And that very much happens, once again, if you're not clear on your mission and you're not clear on what your goals and what it is that you want to achieve. And that can have huge implications, negative implications for people where they constantly live in this state of stress, constantly feeling busy but getting nowhere and just not really know where they're going. And that's where you're generally in this stasis between limbo somewhere and hell, ultimately, having an empty lived life. And where that generally comes about is you're just trying to do everything all of the time in no particular order. So how do you get to heaven, as I call it, a God's Guide to experiencing heaven on earth? And for me, heaven on earth is where you're ultimately living in a place where you feel like you're in line with your values. Happily ever after, your values are enriched naturally. H-E-A-V-E-N, heaven, right? Happily ever after, values enriched naturally. So heaven on earth comes about from you understanding what your true values are. For you understanding that you are working towards your highest order, your highest vision, the reason why you're here and the reason why you're doing everything, and understanding that what you do on a day-to-day basis allows you to reach these goals, these targets, okay? And that's how you truly can feel in line rather than out of line, where you can feel like you are inspired rather than ready to expire. Okay, and these are the things that are going to make an enormous difference to you. And I have other videos that gets into this in more detail on how to find your values and figure out what they are. If you go into rethinktimemanagement.com, I have them in there for you. But so that's where we want to get to, is how do we go from limbo, lacking important mission-based order, to being able to live happily ever after and your values enriched naturally. And what I found that to be is through the path of God. God standing for get one done. Right? Get one done. And I know that not everybody will agree with this. There's people out there that think they're multitaskers and want to do lots of things at the same time. I'm telling you, take it from me, that leads to stress ultimately, right? Get one done. Focus on one thing, get it out of the way, move on to the next thing. But how do you know what one to do? Well, that's why you need to be very clear on your values, be very clear on what your goals are, what do you want to achieve in the next year, the next 10 years, the next 20 years, and you work all that way back to your specific day. What can I do today that will allow me to get closer to my goal at the end of today? And that's how you can prioritize your tasks on a daily basis. And which of these tasks can I prioritize today that will get me closest of my priorities? And then you get that one done. Okay, so if you start to assess that, and I also have in the book Rethink Time Management, I talk about the steps, the Rethink model, where I go through RETHINK, and I get into more detail on 7 specific things you can do to help you with this, which is at rethinktimemanagement.com. And they will add to this. But ultimately, I want you to understand the bigger picture, right? Quite often the reason we're struggling with our time is not because we don't know how to manage time, which is unmanageable, is that we don't know what activities we should do because we don't know what our goals are. We don't have clarity on that. So that's the first thing we need to get clear on. Then we can, once we're clear on what values that light us up, rather than shut us down, then we can prioritize what tasks we need to do on a daily basis and focus on getting one done at a time. And as soon as it's done, we move it out of the way, create a little celebration for getting it done, and then move on to the next and on to the next. And what happens is that this actually energizes you and empowers you rather than quite the opposite, which happens for most people, where they just feel lethargic, they feel low on energy, they feel low on focus, and they just have a general just blur, a general limbo that people live in. And quite interesting that the whole thing, from my perspective, I think, can be related to, this heaven, this limbo, and this heaven, hell, and limbo idea, where if you just get clear on the path to God and getting one done, it can set you free. If you found this interesting, you found it humorous even, and you know that can benefit somebody else, please feel free to share this video, tag somebody in, like it, and please comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.